Todd Brommelkamp joins us today, Locked On Hawkeyes, as we take a look back at the domination against Minnesota and Phil Parker creating controversy with the Ducks. What a wild story.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon. That's Todd Brommelkamp, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We've combined for more than 50 years of covering the Iowa Hawkeyes throughout the years, and glad to have you aboard with us here today. Todd, we are going to break things down, a look back at the dominating performance against Minnesota, and a look of Ferentz versus Fleck, another one that goes to Kirk. We'll break that down. There is controversy with Phil Parker and what he said about the Ducks, at least according to a couple of smooth-brained Duck fans that are out there. We'll make our picks for the weekend. As we are on the precipice of the basketball season for both the men and the women, we'll talk about where our expectations are here as basketball tips off. Good to see you once again, Todd. Thanks for joining us as always. Good stuff out of you, and excited to talk about this one. Always fun when Kirk Ferentz can take it to PJ Fleck.
Yeah, I call back on our conversation last week about how that game was going to play out, and I don't think either one of us saw the total domination that the Hawkeyes were able to exhibit over the Gophers last Saturday.
It was start to finish, and once it got to 17-0 after the pick six, felt like it was over. Drake Lindsey looked like a freshman quarterback against Phil Parker's defense. And, that's one of the big things about this squad that I think is incredibly important is just the development that we saw throughout the month of October out of this defense. There were times that they struggled. You go back to even game number 1 against Albany, and we saw this Albany team that was supposed to be just atrocious, and they're struggling to move the football up and down the field. We saw it at times against Iowa State, and then what it turned into after the first half of the Rutgers game to where it is today. Talk about a complete 180. This team has flipped the script on the defensive side of the football. Last year, all year long, it was about the cornerbacks and how they struggled. And though they had so many good pieces, it wasn't your vintage Phil Parker defense. This year, though, they look like they're definitely trending to be one of the best that we've seen in a while.
I know Halloween is right around the corner, so I think Jekyll and Hyde may be an appropriate comparison here because they look completely different than they did at the beginning of the season. And if you're an Iowa fan, you couldn't be happier right now. That was a vintage Phil Parker defensive performance last week against Minnesota. They have come light years from where they were at the beginning of the year. As you mentioned, we've done several of these podcasts now, and we've talked about the defense being a little bit of an issue for this team. If they continue to play the way that they did last week, now granted, their next opponent next week is not going to be Minnesota. If they play the way that they did last week against Minnesota, they're going to be competitive or able to beat just about anybody that they play.
We saw once again the running game get going, and Kamari Moulton, he's had a lot of nice games at this point, and it feels like there's going to be an elite game. I mean, there's going to be one where he's going to rip off 180, 200 yards rushing. He's trending in that direction. There were 2 plays early in the football game where he just got, and they said it on the broadcast, nabbed by the shoestring. And when you look at what this run game is doing, what you look what this offensive line is doing, Kamari Moulton's playing well, and it feels like there's maybe even more there. And at some point here, the rest of the year in the final 4 games, that he's going to have just one of those breakaway monster performances.
Well, you got to get the ball out of Mark Gronowski's hands first. He continues to run the ball well for the Hawkeyes, but I agree with you. The running back situation is always sometimes a question in Iowa City, and you're waiting for somebody to step up and break out. But, Moulton is that number 1 lead back. And I agree with you. Sometime between now and the Nebraska game, he should have one of those signature games where he goes over 100 yards and looks absolutely dominant. Probably not going to be next week against Oregon, but I think it's coming.
You mentioned Mark Gronowski, and I thought it was interesting listening to Tim Lester on Tuesday talk about his quarterback. And one of the things that we've seen is, he is certainly trending in the right direction now with this extra bye week that they have this year. Though Phil Parker didn't like that very much. He doesn't like talking to the media guys, but and he joked about that at the beginning of the press conference. With this extra bye week, though, another week for him to work back with health. We go back to that first bye week, and we were wondering if he was going to be lost for the season. It felt like Tim Lester was maybe wondering that same kind of question. Here he is. He's going to get healthier. But one of the things that he brought up, Lester did, is about some of the misses that we're still seeing in the passing game. And you go back and you look at that, and Seth Anderson in the end zone just missed on that pass. And a couple of the different throws that we missed, feels like he's sailing those ones just a little bit more. And he said he believes it's probably because of the injury, says that he's playing a little bit lower, which he likes, but that's one thing on his front foot of his delivery that he's missing a little bit. So it does lead to a little bit of excitement as well as they're playing, as well as Gronowski certainly playing. There's probably even more there, and hopefully they can unleash a little bit more in the passing game.
Yeah, I'll shout out our friend Andrew Downs, who is an avid viewer of this podcast. We were talking last week, and he was. I did a podcast with him after the Iowa State game, and he was not quite high on Mark Gronowski, and so I made him eat his words last week. But he has come a long way, and you're starting to see why Iowa invested in him the way that he did. And some of that comes back on the receivers at this point, but some of it does come back to Gronowski not being perfect. But who among us is perfect? You or I, neither you or I were Big Ten quarterbacks. So, I'm not going to cast too many stones his way, but you're starting to see the Mark Gronowski that I think Iowa fans were expecting to get from day one.
And AD, one of the nicest people out there. And hello to AD and to all of our everyday listeners. We love every one of them out there. And, one other thing, going through the coordinators, and we'll get to this ridiculous controversy here coming up in just a little bit with Phil Parker. But on the special team side of things, we've talked about whatever the issues are with Drew Stevens. Already knocked in a couple field goals. Good to see. Is it the hold? Well, you go back to the Indiana game and the laces were in on that kick. You go back. And Reese Dakin. And I thought LeVar put it really, really well. I think a lot of people forget. And it's one thing when Dakin showed up on campus 2 years ago that I had to remind people. Tory Taylor, remember how he kind of thrust onto the scene? Well, he was doing that in the fall of 2020 with dozens of people in the stands. And you guys socially distanced, right, up in the press box. Yeah. And that was the only people that were there at that time. So he walked in there. Not only that, he walked in and what was Tory his freshman year? 23, something like that. Reese Dakin's a regular freshman. He's a young guy coming in here. And Tory also had that step back his sophomore year. There were kind of some of those disappointing moments. You kind of wonder what's going on before he put it all together again his junior, senior year. I think you're seeing that with Dakin a little bit. I do know he had a couple of his friends that are no longer part of the team with the roster limits. Two of his closest friends had to depart. And I wonder if that's, something that's kind of lingering and you're just a little bit out of things that second year. He's got the leg. It's not a talent thing by any means. It is certainly just getting that consistency. It's something that Kirk talks about all the time. Coaches in general talk about that consistency word, but it is an important thing. And I think we're seeing that out of the sophomore Reese Dakin.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is anytime that you lose a legend to the NFL and graduation, it's always tough to be the guy that follows them. And here we are talking about a punter and using the term legend, but Tory Taylor's story kind of writes itself there. And no matter what Dakin did coming in, he was going to draw comparisons to Tory, especially being from Australia as well. And I agree with you that his trajectory seems to be on the same track, and you just hope that maybe there's a little bit more consistency coming ahead. And I still think that there's some issues up front with blocking as well, and that tends to lead to some issues. They still have some near misses, and I still think that they're going to get bit by one of those again here before the season is over. But yeah, I don't think there's too much reason to be concerned about Reese Dakin at this point.
Certainly no concerns about Kaden Wetjen and what we see out of Wetjen again. Kick returner of the year, the Jet Award winner from a season ago, and looks like he's well on his way to accomplishing that for the second consecutive year. The first time that I heard, and I heard a time last year, equating him to Tim Dwight. And for people of our era, Todd, that's kind of cringy. Come on. Tim Dwight was one of one. I don't know. I mean, this dude is special. And, we heard LeVar talk about his fearlessness out there as a returner. That's what you have to be, being low to the ground, much like Tim Dwight. It's something that I'm sure people of our era do struggle a little bit with because Tim Dwight is on this pedestal of what he did and how important he was and what he was in the return game, returning a kick in the Super Bowl, basically winning a game out of Penn State. He did so many things for the Iowa Hawkeye program, but Kaden Wetjen, he's certainly closing the gap.
Absolutely. And to think that they've gone from Cooper DeJean to Kaden Wetjen and not even taken a step back and maybe even taken a step forward is pretty hard to believe. But It's also hard to believe that there's a younger portion of the fan base out there that only knows Tim Dwight from some YouTube highlights and everything. But he was worth the price of admission alone. Now, tickets were cheaper back in that day too, but boy, he was fun to watch. You wanted him to get the ball in his hands, whether it was as a receiver or and a gadget play out of the backfield or as a return man. And you're starting to see Wetjen integrated into the offense a little bit more. And I did not have him being as big of a weapon this year as he has become on my bingo card at the start of the year. But he is right up there with some of the greats in the return game at Iowa, and still has plenty of time left to add to the highlight reel.
Tim Dwight wears number 6 and Superman, the Wayne Larrivee from ESPN Plus back in the day. That was after Raycom, and one of my favorite quotes about Tim Dwight. All right, we continue here, and I mentioned it. There is controversy. The Oregon fans are fired up for something that Phil Parker said at his press conference. We'll talk about that and break things down. Phil Parker, did he get the Hawkeyes in trouble with his press conference? We'll do that as we continue Locked On Hawkeyes. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same intention and how we craft every model. You can feel the craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but smooth handling, great control in your Mazda. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Trent and Todd back with you once again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We are your daily Iowa Hawkeye podcast. Todd, to controversy, and we've been in this business a long time. We know that controversy sells. This one, though, is maybe one of the more idiotic things that I have seen from a fan base, and that is saying a lot, because we have seen plenty of this throughout the year. So if you missed it and you're wondering what you're talking about, maybe you watched the press conference or read through the transcript. This is what got the Duck fans all fired up. This is what Phil Parker had to say when he was talking about Oregon. Yeah, obviously, they can execute. They have some, you start looking at their personnel. They got probably 3 or 4 backs that are really good running backs and highly touted backs. The receivers are a couple of young freshmen, and they're playing, and they can run, and they're fast. So you worry about that. The 2 tight ends are dynamic, and a big offensive line. They have the whole package. It's well-funded, if I can put it that way. That was the part right there. They're well-funded. They have money. Everybody knows this.
Show me the lie.
I'm just absolutely baffled. What he said, to try to equate this to what Mike Gundy said before the thrashing that they handed to Oklahoma State, is such a stretch. I know it's fans. I understand that you're looking for any little thing that you can use. But if you believe that this is going to be something that is going to be a difference maker in this game, Duck fans, I think you are sorely mistaken. It's not to say that Oregon can't win, that Oregon maybe can't win by multiple scores in this game. That's not what this is. This is not going to be the reason. And if it is, Dan Lanning's an even better coach than I thought.
Yeah, a team with the amount of talent that the Oregon Ducks have should not need to look under every rock for motivation. And when I saw Phil Parker and controversy, I was definitely curious and had to do some digging, because I listened to that press conference and I didn't hear anything that jumped out at me as being controversial. But he's absolutely right. Oregon has a well-funded NIL collective, and rightfully so. And they're one of the best football teams in the country. And again, show me the lie there. But I guess whatever you need to motivate you. I don't think it's necessarily the team, but the fans, as you said, are looking for every little battle to fight. I guess maybe they're so successful that they've become boring now, and they've got to look for fights to pick elsewhere. If you're an Oregon fan watching this right now, first of all, welcome. And second of all, lighten up, Francis. It's just, you don't need to pick these nits here. Now, what Gundy said is was much different than Phil Parker said, in my opinion. And hopefully for the Hawkeyes, the outcome of the game is better too.
It's some. I always get a kick out of these things. I go way back, and Todd, you and I were getting old, so we always go way back. I go back to 2006. I went out to the Ohio State-Iowa game after Iowa put it to the Buckeyes in 2005. And after everything in the post game was about what happened a season ago, things that were said a season ago when Iowa won 30-7 against the Buckeyes and all those things. Well, yeah, that's easy to say after you win the football game. We never hear about those things, though, when it goes the other direction. Yes, we very well could see Dan Lanning trying to use this as motivation. He talked about that, said it was adding gasoline to the fire, right, when Gundy's comments came out. And if they're using that, and this is bulletin board material, so be it. But look, if Iowa goes out there and they pull off the upset again and win it, 24-20, is anybody talking about that in the postgame press conference? Hey, did you guys use that as motivation? No, of course not. This will only be something if Oregon wins the football game, because it could be used, but if Oregon loses, it's not going to be used. It's that part of these things that is always kind of missed, because yes, it's only a narrative when it actually fits the narrative.
Yeah, if the Blue Jays wind up winning the World Series, you're going to have a lot of people saying they knew it was going to happen all along. When the Dodgers have been the favorite since spring training. So hindsight in sports is always 2020, and that'll be the case here as well. And we've got an extra week. Adding the extra week to gear up for this game also, I think, fuels the need for controversy, because we got to have something to talk about.
Yes, no doubt about it. That definitely helps things. One thing we do have to talk about is our picks coming up for this week, and a little basketball talk, as we are on the precipice of Iowa basketball. Both the men's and women's get started next week with the regular season. The women, in fact, play on Thursday evening, as they'll get their exhibition matchup, and we'll get our first look at a lot of the newbies, including maybe one of the more buzz players that we can remember in a long time. And that, is Addie Deal. You go back to Caitlin Clark, and she was a local girl. I called a ton of her games. I wondered. It's not to say that Addie Deal is going to be Caitlin Clark, but we also did that again in 2020. Not a lot of people were in the stands. It's going to be different there. We'll talk about where our expectations are for both of these teams and make our picks for the week. Brought to you by FanDuel. We'll do that as we continue Locked On Hawkeyes. Today's episode of Locked On Hawkeyes is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. The swivel screen is an absolute game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat, and the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each and every week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. That's onepeloton.com. Back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Trent Condon alongside Todd Brommelkamp. Thanks for being with us. Todd, it is time to make some picks, talk a little basketball. In fact, let's start right there with the Hoops team. I don't know if it's the overreaction to what we heard about in the two secret scrimmages against St. Louis and against Texas Tech. The lack of shooting in both of those games, I guess, has me a little bit concerned. Hearing what defenses are doing now, obviously, against Bennett Sturtz. And it's exhibition. Coach McCullum, when I was there for Media Day, he mentioned, he treats those exhibitions a little bit differently than he did early in his career. Still, maybe it's just that they haven't shot the ball very well in a couple of exhibition games that has me walking things back a little bit. I think at minimum, on the men's side, I believe this has to be an NCAA tournament team. When you have a preseason All-American point guard, something that Iowa hasn't had in a really long time, a guy of that stature at that spot, I think that needs to be the starting point. But there are times I was like, should our expectations be higher? We've waited so long. We were in college the last time Iowa made the Sweet 16, and now you see a couple of older gentlemen if you're watching this on YouTube. So, Todd, when we go through and we look at this, I feel like I'm back and forth. I want to have big expectations because I really do believe that this team can be different year number one. I believe in McCollum, but I guess that shooting just has me concerned.
Yeah, I think there's reason to be concerned. The one thing is Bennett Sturtz is not going to sneak up on anybody this year like he did at Drake in the Missouri Valley. Everybody knows who he is. You mentioned it. He's on all the preseason All-American lists. Nobody's going to be caught off guard by him this season. And basketball is a very fickle game. Sometimes the shots don't fall. And if you're a optimistic fan, you just have to hope that, it was a couple closed scrimmages, exhibitions, whatever you want to call them. And maybe it was just that the shots weren't falling, but there is a little bit of reason for concern there. And my expectations are, I don't want to say they're low in season number one. I don't think they need to make the NCAA tournament this season. I think they just need to be playing competitive, noteworthy basketball late into the Big Ten season and use this as a building block. If they make the NCAA tournament, that's great. And yeah, you've got Bennett Sturtz for 1 year. You want to try to maximize that. But I do think that there is a word of caution going into the season for Iowa fans not to set the expectations too high for them. And I get it. McCollum's coming in. It's a breath of fresh air. It's exciting. I hate to say this, but I think there are going to be some games where it's lower scoring. And the one thing that I don't want people to do is compare a lower scoring Iowa team to when Todd Licklider was here. But are they going to score 85, 90 points a night like they did under Fran McCaffrey? Hell no. But that's my 10-cent observation on this team this season. There's going to be some nights where the looks like there's a lid on the basket and they struggle, but there could be some nights where they hit some shots as well. And this team is going to go as far as Bennett Sturtz will take them. The number one thing you need to be concerned about there is keeping him healthy this season.
Yes, and played a ton of minutes last year and anticipate that's going to be the case this year. Over on the women's side, brought up yesterday, Bart Torvik, who is an analytical site, a free one for people that don't want to pay for Ken Pomeroy. I use both of them. But he has now his women's stats up on his site and his projections. He started to get into the women's game a year ago. I love the analytics. I love diving in and seeing if they can unearth a little bit more about the squads. He's got Iowa 23rd going into the season with his metrics. Some interesting numbers that come out, obviously, with some of the newbies. They are on most people's preseason top 25. I think that's a good place to start. We have to see Hannah Stuelke. Can it finally translate, to that power forward position and playing her with another big in there? Can she show at least a little bit of range and knock down an open three and hit that corner jumper, those kind of things? Because Hannah Stuelke, we know she's a star. We know she can do so much, but now they're asking her to do even more and become more versatile this season. If we see that, I think there's a ton of upside on the squad.
I do too, and I think the expectations for the women and hopefully a Sweet 16 run this season. And I agree with you. There's so much hype over Addie Deal and some of the younger players, but this is Hannah Stuelke's season this year, and it's her time to step up. And as you said, if they can get her at the 4 with another big on the floor, it's going to open up some things for them and maybe allow them to do some things that they don't when she's playing the 5.
It'll be interesting, too. You look at the veterans. McCabe, obviously a tremendous shooter. If there's a little bit more to her game. We saw that a little bit last season, and maybe adding an extra layer. If they're just closing out so hard on her, she can get to the rim or even pull up jumper from time to time. What we saw from Feuerbach at the end of last year, Kylie Feuerbach went from, we'll see if she's knocking down shots, she's playable. If not, not sure. She was a defensive stopper, and I don't know what clicked, but suddenly she went from a good defender to an elite level defender and being able to guard multiple positions and do it at a high level. If you take that to the next step, what that's going to be. And then the newbies, Emily Rodriguez, they love her upside. I do know that. What is she going to provide, though, here in her first season with the Hawkeyes? Chit-Chat Wright coming in, a small point guard. What does that mean for them? What does that mean for them on the defensive side? So there are a lot more question marks, obviously, than there's been, I think, the last couple of seasons. But as I mentioned, the upside with this team, if it all kind of clicks, if it all hits, if you will, boy, you mentioned Sweet 16. It feels like that is maybe even a baseline for this team. You look across the Big Ten, UCLA is going to be a behemoth again. USC is still going to be USC and very good, even obviously with the big injury that they have over there. And then the Nebraskas, the Ohio States of the world. It's going to be competitive, but there's a chance that Iowa, I think, can reach up there and maybe, if it all clicks, be in that top 4 and get the double bye.
And that's really all you need to do in the Big Ten. The expectation should not be to win the Big Ten. If it happens, it happens. But this team is somebody can come out of the Big Ten finishing fourth or fifth and make a deep run into the NCAA tournament. And there's no reason to believe that Iowa isn't one of those teams capable of that at this point. But it is going to be interesting to see how those young players integrate into the system. Is Deal going to start? Is Jan going to bring her off the bench? What are the lineups going to look like? But at the end of the day, it's going to be another fun season of women's basketball in Iowa City. And you just hope that they can keep this going. And given her success on the recruiting trail recently, I see no reason to believe that they won't.
Over to our picks presented by FanDuel. We wrap things up here with Todd Brommelkamp and the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Now, if I would have told you this summer, I was going to give you 3 touchdowns for Penn State going to Ohio State, I don't think you could have got your money down fast enough. Here we are, Buckeyes, a 20.5-point favorite.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot for Penn State, and I really like that Penn State team and the effort that they put up against the Hawkeyes a couple weeks ago. Are they going to be able to show up and show out against the Buckeyes, or is that going to turn into a rout? I personally wouldn't touch that one. I'm curious if you've got some thoughts on it, but that is a lot of points to give a team that I think definitely will view that game as a measuring stick.
I, in general, always grab the points, and same thing. You give me basically 23 points of value from what it was in the look-ahead line. I almost have to take it, but I don't think I will either. How is Penn State going to score against this Ohio State defense? It's not even a whole lot about Penn State. It's more about Ohio State and what we've seen certainly on the defensive side of the football there. Yeah, that's a stay away for me. Going to be intriguing, though, and definitely going to be watching that one at 11. Big Ten-wise, a couple of others. The night game on NBC, I think, is the most intriguing. I'm grabbing the points with the Huskers, and I understand. Looked terrible 2 weeks ago against Minnesota. Were a pass interference missed call away from being tied up against Northwestern at home on Saturday. Still, it's USC traveling, 40-degree weather. We knew USC in the Midwest has not gone very well this year. I think Nebraska is going to be able to score against this USC team. I think it's going to be a bit of a shootout. I will grab the points in this one. And of the Big Ten this week, probably my favorite bet, gross, Nebraska plus the points.
Friends don't let friends bet on Nebraska football at this point. But I agree with you. I like the reasoning there with USC coming to Nebraska. Speaking of points, I like the over in the Indiana-Maryland game this weekend. I see nobody slowing down the Curt Cignetti offense at this point, and Maryland's capable of putting some points on the board. And then the other one on the Big Ten slate that I was looking at is Minnesota and Michigan State. How does Minnesota respond after basically being dehumanized by the Hawkeyes last weekend? Michigan State is not a great football team by any stretch of the imagination. It's a 3-point spread, home team. I think Minnesota answers. They pick themselves up off the mat and get back in the win column with a win over Michigan State. So I would lay the 3 with Minnesota this weekend.
You look at the home road splits for Minnesota. We saw it showed up again last week. I'm with you. I think that's a really good play. That'll be a family play. I'll jump aboard with you this weekend and jump on the Gophers.
Don't blame me if they lose, but I respect PJ Fleck still, and I think he's going to use what happened last weekend as motivation to finish the season strong. But you and I have seen it before. There have been plenty of instances in the past. Teams have a loss like Minnesota had at Iowa, and then they go downhill. So I'm interested to see how they respond.
And, of course, we'll get to see Sparty coming up here in just a couple of weeks. That'll do it for today. Those are our picks presented by FanDuel. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We are your daily Iowa Hawkeye podcast. Todd, good seeing you again. We'll talk to you again next week, and we'll see if those Duck fans are still fired up.
All right.
Thanks for being with us. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Until then, go Hawks.